Welcome to the road to Acapulco. There's a new idea in town, an idea that's been heralded by Bob Podolsky for 32 years. It's an idea that will change the world, and it's beginning to take shape in Acapulco.
All right, welcome everyone. This is episode 6 of The Road to Acapulco. This is Michael Nimetz, and I'm here with the great Bob Podolsky. And today we're going to talk about the problem with hierarchy. Right. All the issues that come about in, I guess, most of the organizations that we encounter these days is I have trouble with this word for some reason, but hierarchical?
Yes. Got it. Hierarchic.
Yeah.
Or hierarchical, either way.
So, obviously, these organizations are not created for creativity. They're created for control. And I guess we could just start with what are some of the biggest problems with the hierarchy?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that for most people, it's most easily illustrated by an example. And the example is a job where you have a boss. Now, if you have a job where you have a boss, then you are working in a hierarchy. It's that simple. Mm-hmm. But there are things about that relationship with your boss that make it a hierarchy, because in the absence of those characteristics, it wouldn't be a hierarchy, it would be a partnership.
Yeah.
So take note that when you have a boss, in general, the boss will tell you what to do, where to do it, when to do it, how to do it, what to wear while you're doing it, how much time you can spend not doing the work. In other words, can you take a break? Can you go to the potty? What kind of constraints are there on you? And use frequently many. And then in the midst of all of that, you're also your boss usually determines your salary. And through the salary, it's determined what kind of house you live in, what kind of car you drive, what kind of schools your kids go to, what kind of vacations you take. These are the circumstances of working in a hierarchy. Now, it's true that there are hierarchies that are not as bad as others, where some of these decisions are left to you, but in general, hierarchy means that there's someone higher than you, and they have authority over you. And they have a right to tell you what to do and to punish you one way or another if you do not comply.
So I'm sure that most people have experienced these type of issues working for somebody else, where they have a great idea or they see an opportunity to do something better, but they're prevented from doing that because they've got a boss. And even if they go to their boss and they say, hey, this is a great idea, what do you think about us doing it? We don't have time for that, or you should be working on this, or why are you thinking about this when we've got you assigned to that, and so forth.
Good point.
It stifles a lot of the opportunities that people could use to improve productivity and potentially benefit from. It also doesn't have a structure where you can realize the benefits from your improvement to the job, other than just being able to do your job quicker and maybe just do it in a shorter period of time and then take a longer break or something like that. But essentially, if you create a new technique or some kind of technology that you can do on your job, you really don't get any benefit out of it other than what you do for yourself. It isn't passed along to the rest of the team or anything like that.
Quite right. And even beyond that, excuse me, what you're describing is what I call the de-incentivization of the employee. That as an employee in such an organization, you have very, very few incentives to do anything. The strongest incentive present in a hierarchy is the incentive to avoid punishment. And one way to avoid punishment is to not do anything, to be passive and to essentially hide who you are, what you're about, what you might contribute, in the interest of avoiding punishment. This is the usual environment of the hierarchy. And in fact, if you don't have these factors working in your organization, you don't have a hierarchy. You've got something else. Maybe something with a name, maybe not. But these are huge advantages and disadvantages to being an employee. And there's a further issue that as an employee, you are at the mercy of the person who can fire you. Your boss can certainly do that, and probably his boss and his boss and his boss could do that. And so there is this downside risk. If you rub someone the wrong way, you're out of there, you've lost your career. And maybe you've lost the chance of getting good reviews, and you've lost the chance of getting good reports on your work. And so it's very risky to break the rules, to do something new. Anything new becomes suspect. Basically, if you have an opinion that doesn't comply with the standard opinions that are held by the members of the hierarchy, then you become an outsider without even knowing it, possibly, until you find that you're not getting the opportunities, you're not getting the advancements, you're being passed over for promotions, all of which are ways that people penalize others.
Well, and even in the circumstance that you get a promotion, not everybody is, the leadership type, where they take control of other people's time and tasks and so forth, and lead other people or manage other people's times and tasks. And so you get into a circumstance where even if you do move up the ladder, you end up in a situation where that may not be well suited for you. You might be great at doing the work, but because you want to get more pay, you take the promotion, but that ends up being less productive and more difficult for you than just doing the thing that you like to do.
Quite right. Yeah, so these are all among the disadvantages of hierarchy. And there's a whole body of culture that goes along with hierarchy. In other words, if you're part of a hierarchy, there you are in the middle of this pyramid-shaped organization. That is, if you draw out a diagram of it, you see that you're part of this pyramid. And there are fewer and fewer people towards the top of the pyramid, and more as you go down. And there you are trying to find a place for yourself that makes sense to you. Well, what are the chances that what you find is going to give your life meaning, that is going to give your life something good, that will make you feel that what you're doing counts for something and is actually creative as opposed to just productive? People need to be rewarded for their productivity, and people need to be rewarded for their creativity, which is a different phenomenon. That's not the same as productivity. You can have people who are very productive, who turn out tons and tons, literally tons of products, but who create nothing, where other people did the creating. So the absence of creative incentives to be creative is a huge drawback to hierarchy.
Well, in general, it's a control mechanism.
Right.
It's not a mechanism that's built for encouraging people to be creative.
Exactly. And because of that, it has the opposite effect. It destroys creativity. And in fact, as a species, we're not going to really approach what our potential is, what humans have the capability, the inherent capability of being. We can't get close to that until we give up hierarchy. Now, that does have some immediate consequences because there are people who get off on hierarchy. There are people who love to boss other people around, who love to punish other people for what they see as infractions. And those people are very frustrated in organizations that are not hierarchic. That's why we don't have more of them, because we've got plenty of people like that. And most of the people who are like that are merely emulating what they learned from their parents. We learn how to be in a group very early, the first group being the family into which you're born. And it's very rare family. It's a very rare family that gives only positive incentives to the infants that it brings into the world. There's too much punishment, and with that, all kinds of evils come into the society as a result of relatively gentle violence that might be done to very small children. Very small children cannot tolerate any amount of violence without warping who they are becoming as children. The process of warping who we are is the thing that psychotherapists call character structure. And this is a lot about how do you pretend to be someone other than you are. People do not want to remember their first few years. And the reason is because they're unpleasant. These were not good years. These were not years when we really found out how to manifest all of the capabilities we have. These are years when we're beaten down to be obedient and compliant, and that is the norm today. It doesn't have to stay the norm. And even those people, especially who point at the so-called human nature as a justification for the way things are, be aware human nature is constantly changing. That today the media, both the mainstream media and the alternative media, are shaping human nature every day. So to talk about human nature as if it was unchanging is a terrible mistake, and is often used as a justification for evil deeds.
You know, I was watching a video of George Carlin the other day, and he was talking about his main topic was bullshit, and how America is just the manufacturer of bullshit at every level, just tons and tons of bullshit.
Right.
Is that really just a result of the system, the hierarchical structure, that people understand that, like, their boss is usually full of shit, and it's kind of because of the structure that puts them in that position.
Right. If they weren't in a hierarchy, they couldn't get away with being full of shit all the time.
Yeah. So in a lot of cases, like as a leader or as a manager, many cases that you're restricted as well. Just kind of going up the ladder here. Mm-hmm. You're restricted as well from being creative because they've kind of got a slot for you to fill. And so, kind of going back to the children example, you know, children essentially are in this type of system are basically just born as cogs of the machine.
Right.
They are at the base of the machine, and that's all they're valued at. Whereas the Octologue is totally changing that, is showing that each and every person has the potential to be anything and everything they want to be and impact everybody else as great as they want to.
Right. Quite so. Yes, the potential of the individual, it cannot be overestimated and is often underestimated. That people who are creating organizations from the top down, they determine what those organizations are. You cannot have a hierarchic organization that is not a reflection of whoever's at the top. And if they're not highly creative and ethical, you're going to wind up with a whole organization of people who are unethical, uncreative, cruel, sadistic, whatever their particular early experience turned them into. And there it is, just playing itself out. Not a healthy situation for most of us. And, as you just pointed out, there's an alternative.
So, in the case of just a comparison between a Octologue formed organization competing against a typical hierarchical organization, the people are going to, 1, get rewards, 2, have the ability to be creative, 3, they only have to deal with the other 7 people in the Octologue. But they also get to realize their own individual potential.
Right.
So these are all huge benefits.
Exactly.
That don't really have anything to do with money per se, but could potentially have a great deal to do with, the overall prosperity and experience and ability to kind of specialize in doing what you really want.
Mm-hmm.
So if we compared the two, the Octologue organization basically gives each one of the members the ability to just grow, grow all the time. From a child in an Octologue, you could put them in an Octologue as a family member, essentially. They're growing. And they're allowed to be creative. They're allowed to express themselves. They're allowed to reject things that they don't feel comfortable with.
Right.
These are all things that are teaching the participants in the Octologue that they have value. Whereas in the regular world, in the world that we exist today, none of those are the case. Everything is about control.
Mm-hmm. Quite right. Quite right. The Octologue is a real phenomenon. This is something that, until you experience it firsthand, you can only really glimpse its capabilities. I'm sure Michael, you have described your experience with the Octologue and how your confidence in it grew in stages as you went from just being curious to being actively interested to being involved, where you're actually doing things, to where you are the leader of a group now because you have demonstrated a willingness to go beyond what most people do. And most people do have the potential to learn to do that. And my hope is, and my expectation is, that what you are putting together in the group here is going to become an example, and it's already becoming a really good example of the power of the methodology. So for those who are unfamiliar, let me very quickly review what that means. Every Octologue has 6 qualities, if you will, that are not common in hierarchies. First of all, they're small. 7 to 9 people is typical. And it's easy to hold a conversation in a group of 7 to 9. You get up to 12 or more, and it becomes difficult to just hold a conversation. So the fact that the groups are small is very important. The groups make unanimous decisions. Now, some people think that, that's going to waste so much time having to have unanimous decision. But the benefits are vastly worth the extra time it takes to make the decisions.
Well, and I think that also enhances the creativity too, because
Absolutely.
As you start to get objections from other people, you start to talk about what is a possible solution to that, and that usually brings up some creativity. Exactly.
There are many stimulants for creativity in the structure of an Octologue. Not the least of which is the next important characteristic, which is that the people in the Octologue share a common ethical purpose. Now, of course, in order to do that, consistently, they have to know what that means. What is ethical? What is not? What is an ethic, for that matter? I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a group of people and they all claim that they live their lives ethically, but not one of them can actually define what is an ethic. It's quite remarkable. It's not hard to fill in to educate people once they get to that point where they say, oh my gosh, I want to live ethically, but I don't really know what that means. And so we have now a well-defined definition for an ethical act. And in short, an ethical act is one that increases truth, awareness, love, or creativity without limiting or diminishing any of those resources for anyone. That constitutes an ethical act. When you logically figure out what does that mean in terms of defining a set of principles that are derived from that definition, you wind up with about a dozen principles that you can apply to any situation, and it becomes tantamount to having a compass in your head, a compass that points you in the direction of evolution, as it turns out. It's instead of north, your magnetic compass points north. This kind of compass, this ethical compass, points to evolution.
Well, let me stop you right there. Typically in a hierarchical organization, they'll have a mission statement, and they'll work very hard to come up with a mission statement that everybody can agree to and align themselves with. Those typically are very, short-sighted, I guess, in a lot of ways. Or maybe they're broad, but what ends up happening is that now you're just limited to one direction, and that direction is determined by the person at the top.
Right.
And regardless of what that direction then means to the rest of the people, he's going to maintain that direction, and he might let people go. This might be the circumstance of, Chrysler during the 1970s.
Right.
Where they just kept producing crappy cars when most of the workforce probably realized that
these are crappy cars.
These are crappy cars. I don't even like building them. They suck so bad.
Right.
But because the whole organization is sitting there going, why are we doing this? The product just keeps getting worse.
Right.
And as long as the president of the company or the CEO continues to lead in that direction, essentially they'll just continue to go down that path until the business bankrupts itself.
Yes, and very frequently, before it reaches the bankruptcy stage, such companies, when they're big enough, they'll attempt to compensate for their lack of creativity by buying up smaller companies. This is very typical. I've run into this many, many times. Well, yes, a big company can make itself marginally more creative by buying up a small company that's still being creative. But what usually happens, almost always, is the big company corrupts the culture of the small company, and that creativity goes away.
Yeah.
And so the strategy generally doesn't work. What has to happen for the company to actually recover is to reinstall creativity as a very important goal, or a very important part of how they plan for the future. And the planning has to be long-term planning, not just next month, what do we do? It's next year, next decade, next century. You want to have some long vision in order to really figure out what has to be done. That can change things dramatically, but as you pointed out, it's got to come from the top if you have a hierarchy to start with.
Yes.
It's in some ways easier to create a new organization that isn't like that.
Well, and it's also easy to see the circumstances of that particular business or corporation, create an Octologue that competes against it.
Yes. And the evidence, although I don't have massive evidence to prove it, with one exception. I do have one piece of massive evidence, but generally speaking, evidence of the superiority of the Octologue compared to the hierarchy usually comes down to a number of factors. I guess what I'm attempting to say is that if you have two organizations of about the same size and have access to about the same level of resources, and they're in competition with each other to accomplish something ethical, and one is a holomat or an octologue, and the other is a hierarchy, I would expect, based on my experience, that the holomat or the octologue is going to win the competition hands down.
Yes.
It's going to be far and away better. And a lot of times when this has been actually played out, the results are way beyond what people expect going into it. One of the things that happened in Japan as a result of William Edwards Deming was the Japanese industry, which he taught the industry to become more quality conscious, and actually he had 25 suggestions that he offered industries generally, and Japanese industry in particular, come back in 1950. He offered these suggestions as a way of putting in place modern statistical quality control. Inadvertently, perhaps, he also these suggestions made the operations of the corporation more ethical. And even though they remained hierarchic, they became more susceptible to feedback. Bureaucracy is the systematic elimination, destruction, or avoidance of corrective feedback. So by making Japanese industries more sensitive to feedback, he made them vastly better than their competition. And between 1950 and approximately 1965, Japanese industry went from being the worst in the world, probably, to being one of the best, if not the very best, instance of...
And essentially, we're talking about a very slight improvement to the conditions of the workers overall that gave them a little bit more control of their circumstances to give feedback to the management.
They actually got respect for making good suggestions, and they got some rewards for it.
Yeah.
And that turned the whole industry around. Unfortunately, the government didn't apply the same principles to what they were doing. And so they continue to have a government run on essentially a
bureaucracy.
The sword wielders, these what do they call those Japanese samurai? It's the samurai model that they utilize. And while there are some good things about that, there's a lot of bad things about that, and it's still definitely hierarchic, very hierarchic. And so the government, while permitting the industry to become thriving, they basically changed the constraints through the monetary system, and that is today ruining the work of Deming, because now the government is doing things to the industry that are counterproductive and go against the maximization of creativity.
So just to kind of give a gauge to this, if the whole thing with the Japanese manufacturing improvement is essentially giving the individual worker the capacity to increase their mental capacity by, say, 5%, go from using 10% of their brain to using 15% of their brain. That basically changed them from being the worst to the best.
Right.
But we're talking about is an octologue is not giving them a 5% or a 50% increase from their 10%. It's being able to maximize their 100% and then multiply that times the 7 other members in there. So the potential for the octologue to impact businesses is just off the planet.
Right.
The stars are the limits
right.
of what we're talking about as the possibilities as far as impacting business.
Right. And it's really hard, I think, for most people to wrap their mind around that right away. But the Japanese experience certainly proves that if you make even a marginally more ethical organization that's only marginally more sensitive to feedback, you get huge results. And the Japanese proved that. And someday, the recognition of how Deming's work created an improvement in the ethics is something not generally talked about, but it definitely is there. And I think that a time will come when even the Japanese are going to realize, we didn't just change statistical quality control, we changed the whole paradigm of feedback and what it means. Remember, bureaucracy is the systematic elimination, destruction, or avoidance of corrective feedback, and it is rife. In hierarchies, it's almost unavoidable.
Yeah.
In Japanese industry, it has been diminished. The effect of that has been diminished, and the industry has flourished because of that. So I really like seeing that. I think that's a really great press, if you will, or PR for the non-hierarchic organization. Mm-hmm. When that information starts to spread, as it is just starting now, I mean, we see it starting here in Acapulco. We have a core group of people here that see it. We're acting on it. We're getting good results. People are getting excited. And there's no reason why this cannot spread rapidly worldwide. So we don't have to take 500 years or 50 generations to change the culture. What we're really doing, as I see it, is we are making up for the fact that the human culture was basically, the evolution of culture was arrested 8,000 years ago with the invention of government. That's about when government was invented in Sumer 8,000 years ago. And what we see is that now we have an opportunity to reverse that after 8,000 years. Why did it take 8,000 years? I don't know. There have been people in the meantime who've pointed out this possibility. I'm not the first. John David wasn't the first. But you could go back 3,500 years and look at what the Israelites did with their groups of 10. It was another approach to solving the same problem, and it worked for the Israelites until some of their envious neighbors destroyed them. But it was well thought through at the time, and the people who were doing these groups of 10, they were thriving. They were doing very well, and that, but they were surrounded by people who were relatively barbaric, and they wanted the fruits of the creativity without having to become creative. And so they destroyed that culture.
But luckily for us, we've got the internet now in a much more advanced communication system that we can deliver the message across the world, across the planet in a matter of seconds.
Right.
So once we demonstrate this success and people start to grasp what we're talking about, all kinds of good things can happen in all different places and directions.
In fact, I see it as inevitable that good things will happen.
Yeah.
I see them already beginning here, and I see no way that it can stop. It's an idea, basically. And governments have tried, many governments have tried many times to destroy ideas. But you can't destroy a good idea. Even if a good idea is wiped out completely, the circumstances that made that good idea available still apply, and so someone else will think up that good idea. We don't have to worry about this is going to go away. What we do want to do is to protect this good idea as best we can, as long as we can, to give it time to germinate. You know, it's like planting a seed. You plant a seed, you don't know immediately what's going to happen, except you know that the seed has some DNA that's going to determine the outcome if the seed is in fertile ground and has the proper nutrition and water and so forth. Well, here, what's fertile ground for this new idea? Well, fertile ground is 90% of the people in the world hate their jobs. I'd say that's pretty fertile ground for an idea that can change that to where people wake up in the morning and say, wow, I get to go to work today. Woo! You know, it could be a cause of excitement instead of dread, you know, as opposed to, oh, God, I got to go to work today. You know.
Well, kind of going along with that idea of fertile ground, there are places that are more fertile than others. And, you know, we're sitting here in Mexico, and the difference between Mexico and the United States in regard to people working together, I think, is immense. And I think this is one of the reasons that I really like the idea of implementing the Octologue here in Mexico, as opposed to the United States, is because people work together. People do have a exceptional work ethic in Mexico, but beyond that, they also work together. They have a strong family bond.
Right, families and communities.
Yeah, and they have a good attachment to their community. If you compare that to the United States, there is a lot of problems that the individual runs into in the United States, and I think this has got a lot to do with why the Octologue is having such a difficulty being instituted in the United States, is because there's so many things that divide people, that keep them from working together.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I think you're quite right. In the States, government does not want people to work together. They don't want cooperation. They want people to be divided. They want people to be at each other's throats. They want people to distrust each other. And I think the reason for that is mainly, not the only reason, but mainly, I think the reason is because they themselves will never inspire that kind of trust that a group like an Octologue can inspire. I trust the members of an Octologue. Once the Octologue has come together and decided what they're about and who's a member and so on, I would walk into any established Octologue and completely trust the people in it to be honest with me. I would not have that trust in any other kind of group, because other groups don't have the feedback mechanism of the Octologue. The Octologue, one of the commitments that the members of an Octologue make is that I am going to give the other members of the group my honest feedback, whether they like it or not, and whether I like doing it or not, which is even harder. Mm-hmm. You know, there are people very reluctant to say, I'm calling bullshit on what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
But in an Octologue, we have a commitment to do that if we believe that someone is suggesting something unethical or something that's inappropriate or ineffectual. We are committed to saying so, to sharing that, and to do so caringly, not from a place of, oh, I'm the smart one and you're the dumb one and you're so stupid and blah, 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 blah. We're not putting each other down. We're basically saying, I want you to succeed. I think this additional information might make you more successful. Yes. Wow. We celebrate each other's successes instead of dreading them.
Yes.
Oh, a whole different culture than people are used to.
Yes, and I think each individual would easily recognize that that's growth.
Right.
That's growth within their own character.
Right.
Learning how to give people feedback that's difficult is very important.
Yes.
And many people go through their entire life letting that barrier stand in their way.
Right.
And
right.
Now this is a mechanism that can resolve that and allow people to move beyond that, which everybody should recognize as a huge, huge opportunity.
Well, when as few as 5% recognize that, life's going to be different. It's not, we don't need to have 100% recognize it in order for things to be rapidly changing the way we want to see them changing. All we have to get is a relatively small percentage that really gets it, and then it'll have a life of its own. Mm-hmm. It'll be impossible to stop it. Not that attempts won't be made.
Yes.
It's like the Bitcoin. Right now, buying and selling Bitcoins and using Bitcoins as money, there isn't a lot of opposition to it. I anticipate that a day will come when governments are going to feel so threatened by it, they're going to outlaw it. Mm-hmm. And then exchanges where you can go online and buy Bitcoins for dollars, for example, they're going to go away because they'll be made illegal. Oh, it's illegal to trade in Bitcoins. But that's when the fun begins, because you don't have to have an exchange to buy and sell Bitcoins. I have a very close friend who, for the last 2 years, has made his living buying and selling Bitcoins. From his perspective, if they got made illegal, he'd say, great, I'm going to have a lot more customers.
Yeah.
And the reason people will pay him a premium for the Bitcoins that he sells is
because it actually has value.
It has value, and it's private.
Yeah.
There's no record of it. If I go and buy Bitcoins from him, I put Fern's Federal Reserve notes in his hand, and he transfers Bitcoins to my Bitcoin wallet. He doesn't have to know my name. He doesn't have to know my location. He doesn't have to know anything about me other than I've got some cash that I'm willing to trade him for some Bitcoins.
Yeah. That's
all he cares about in that transaction. And I think that's a really wonderful thing, and I want to see lots more people doing that. And by the way, I haven't mentioned this before, but if there are people nearby who want to buy Bitcoins, I can provide them. And I can do it anonymously. You don't have to go to some exchange and put your name on the line so that those Bitcoins are known to be yours. Oh my gosh, why do that?
Well, and if anybody was looking to start an Octologue and have a simple purpose that would be successful, it would be to establish a local Bitcoin marketplace.
Exactly.
That people could, buy and sell Bitcoin.
And it's not hard to do.
Within that 8 people. Mm-hmm. I think you could have a great deal of success just doing that alone. Mm-hmm. But moving on to some of the other things that are bad about hierarchy, the idea of politics. We obviously have the national politics, the politicians going back and forth, but you've also got politics within the individual businesses and so forth, the office politics, the water cooler politics that goes on every day, the things that we've got to accept or not accept about people because of the political environment within the workspace. Mm-hmm. With an Octologue, that essentially is non-existent, because people have to talk to each other, and give each other rational feedback, right?
Absolutely. The feedback environment in the hierarchy sucks, always, even the good ones, if you can, the ones that you might regard as good, and in order to institute an Octologue-based organization of any size, in other words, a holomat, you have to have people who are willing to form relationships that have certain characteristics. And we know what those characteristics are. And part of what we do is we teach people how to do that. And for example, we have a number of workshops that we're either giving or planning to give. And the first one, of course, is what is an Octologue? How do you organize one? How do you expand it into a holomat? The basics of that is the first workshop. Second workshop is, okay, you like these ideas. You'd like to make a living teaching others this stuff. So you take the mentorship workshop, which teaches you how to teach the first workshop. Okay, that's certainly doable. But all of these really, really, really profound changes come from deep within. As Foster Gamble pointed out, you don't revolutionize or make huge changes in society without first plumbing the depths of your own experience. Personal growth, personal awareness, really understanding who you are makes you much, much more capable of holding your own in an octologue and making great things happen. So self-exploration is a very highly valued activity within the Octologue community. So to assist in that, we offer a soul bonding workshop, which is basically teaching a series of tools, 6 of them actually, that allow people to find out, who am I really? Okay, if I'm not pretending to be someone, if I'm really being genuine and authentic, what does that mean? What is the authentic me? Well, the authentic me is, at least in part, a function of how was I treated as a small child and what did I do in response to the way I was treated. Mm-hmm. We are able now to track those things and, in effect, to recognize when those early experiences are wounding and to heal those wounds as adults. And yes, we want to teach mothers how to raise their children so that they're not wounded. And so the
future
generations are going to depend on that being common knowledge, which it isn't now. But as we do our thing, that will happen. I see no way around it. And I see that having a high level of personal awareness is something that will become more and more common. Today it's pretty rare. I mean, think about it this way. How many people do you know who remember anything before the age of 5? Very few people have memories that go back before that. Mm-hmm. When you know who you are, you remember everything, because all of your experience is stored in your brain. All of it. And so if you don't remember nursing at your mother's breast, or you don't remember the experience of being born, or you don't remember the pain of being circumcised when you're a few days old, then that means you don't know who you are. Because if you were not hiding from who you are, you would remember all these things.
That's very interesting, and you're certainly an example of that. You have a great deal of memories. Even at 78 years old, I consider your memory to be phenomenal.
Oh, wow. Well, I have to confess, it's better at early experiences than it is at what did I have for breakfast yesterday. My short-term memory is not what it used to be, but this is normal for someone my age. I still have enough short-term memory that I'm able to do what I need to do day by day. I don't think I'm demented, but I do see that, yeah, I need to download a lot of what I know while I still have the chance to do it, because I've spent my whole life very actively gathering new and useful and often surprising information. And I'm really intent on sharing a lot of that, and I expect to devote the rest of my life to doing that. And that alone makes for a very satisfying life. I'm living the life I always wanted to live. And for those of you who aren't, heed my words. You can live the life you've always wanted. Now, it ain't going to come along and present itself to you for nothing. You have to earn it. You have to buy it. You have to invest in it. And not just money. You have to invest time and effort and a certain kind of self-searching.
But the beauty of what you're offering is that these are all things that are available in an Octologue.
Right.
You don't have to go across the country. You don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to find it. You don't have to go to some school. You don't have to find a professor.
Right.
All you have to do is find 7 other people that have similar purpose that you can work with. And you don't have to work with a lot. You can work with them maybe an hour a week or an hour every other week.
It's even simpler than that. You don't need 7 to start.
Yeah, well, that's true.
When I started an Octologue, each time I've started one, I've been alone. Okay, I have an idea. I want to put it in practice. That means finding other people that like the idea. If I can't find anyone that likes the idea, it could mean it's a lousy idea. Or it could mean it's so new that people are fearful of it, need to get over that anxiety before they test it. And that's what is going on with the Octologue now. People are starting to test it. Where before, I wasn't persuasive enough to get people actively involved. People would say, oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, you ready to start an Octologue? Well, no, I'm too busy with this, I'm too busy with that. People have all their reasons or excuses. But right now, that's all changing rapidly right here in Acapulco. We have a group of people here who see the benefit, who want more of it, and are investing time and energy in making it happen. My hat's off to this group. You know, this is something I've spent 32 years looking forward to, and finally it's happening. And you, listeners, you can be part of it. You don't have to substitute something else for that awareness. You can actually jump in where you are. If you want to get on the road to Acapulco, do it intellectually from home. You don't have to be down here in Mexico. You can be at home anywhere in the world and use these principles once you learn them. Now, it's true, you probably benefit by coming here and taking a course, take a workshop, take a soul bonding course.
Or just experiencing the actual Octologue.
Right, just come down here and see what's going on. And then go home and reproduce what you saw here. There are places in the world where this is more likely to happen than others. And probably the United States is not the most likely.
Yeah, I think the United States might just be the worst place to try and do an Octologue.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, it might be.
But there's still hope. There's still hope because
Absolutely.
One thing Americans do is they do like to see success.
Right.
And if they keep their eyes open for success, I think they're going to see that the Octologue is absolutely the most successful thing that they could ever possibly get themselves involved in.
It hadn't occurred to me, but you did point out that the Octologue could well be the best new idea ever to come along in the history of our race, or of our species. That maybe all of the previous innovations were secondary to this.
Yes.
And that makes sense to me because, you know, there's something so fundamental about being born into a family. What does that mean if the family is part of a holomat? You see, if you could be born into a holomat and grow up in that environment, taking it for granted, as opposed to going, oh my gosh, it's new, maybe it won't work. You know, well, no, this is the culture I'm born into.
Mm-hmm.
Well, today, nobody's born into it, but that's coming. There will be families that understand it, and we will be teaching Octologue technology to grade schoolers. We'll be teaching the ethics underlying that almost from birth. Ethics goes way back.
So to summarize essentially what we talked about today, the idea of what's the problem with hierarchy. There's a lot of problems. In fact, most people are spending most of their time, wasting their time, dealing with all the bad results of what a hierarchical circumstance has.
Right.
Whether it be in their job or the government that they have to deal with, or even their families.
Mm-hmm.
All the politics and all the infighting and all the difficulties that come along with that. Everybody has, I'm sure, a long list of experiences. all that stuff is really time that could be dedicated to something that they want to do.
Yeah.
And if people understood that all that wasted time could be productive time, what could potentially be the world that we live in is just, the sky is the limit. The shining city on the hill is just the first step into a much greater world.
Right.
If we just adopt this idea.
I couldn't be more excited. I'm gratified that there are now other people who are catching on. And I see the rest of my life as being devoted to helping those people make it happen successfully. And I think it's going to get easier and easier. You know, whenever something new is being done, it's right at the beginning when it's first being done that it's the hardest to do. Creating octologues and creating holomats of octologues is something that at this stage is difficult because it's unfamiliar. But what's it going to be like when there are millions of people enjoying being part of octologues, and someone comes out of grade school or high school and they say, what am I going to do in my life? Oh, look at this. Here are the people that are most successful. Here are the ones that are happy. Here are the ones who are the least neurotic, the ones that are thriving in the world, the ones who are making exceptional things happen, the people who are the most confident. They're going to be people in octologues. It can't be some other way. Now, there are people who will say, and there are already people saying, oh, well, show me the success stories. Where are all the testimonials? Where are all the groups that are doing wonderful things this way? Well, right now we don't have a lot of them. But there is one happening right here, right now, here in Acapulco. And the fact that it can happen anywhere, even just once, proves that it's feasible. It only takes one example of it working to prove that it works. Now, are there circumstances where it won't work? Certainly. So what? I don't care about those circumstances. I care about the billions of more times that it is successful, can be successful, where it will work. And we know it will work like 2 + 2 is 4. We have an algorithm, if you will, or a pattern or a paradigm that tells us what to do. Okay? If you want more truth, awareness, love, and creativity, then you judge your own actions by deciding, am I increasing these resources for at least one person without limiting or diminishing them for anyone? And as long as I follow that pattern, I've got a success story. That in and of itself is a success story without any riches and tangibles coming out of it. The mere experience of living your life this way is so gratifying. Your health will improve, your relationships will improve, your marriage will improve. Everything in life improves with this strategy put in place.
Well, I also want to point out something else that a hierarchy has, and that is, most of the people are essentially foot soldiers. Mm-hmm. They have really no power. They're essentially waiting to be victims of somebody at the top.
Right.
Whereas in an octologue, people are viewed as valuable. Each member is a valuable piece in the overall holomat.
Right.
And so when someone is the victim of something, let's say the government comes to get one of our members of our holomat, mm-hmm. we look at that as an attack of the whole system.
Sure.
So if the government comes and they want to take one of our people, all of us are going to say,
hell no.
What exactly are you doing? This is a valuable person in our community.
Right.
What are the charges? What is the evidence? What is going on here? And in most cases, the government is going to be, well, actually, no, we don't have that. No, and it will be very clear that people that adopt themselves into an Octologue and into a holomat are going to find themselves in a very secure position.
True.
Which they would never understand in a hierarchy. They would just consider themselves a foot soldier.
Right, that's very true. And in fact, there are ramifications of that, such as if you create a holomatic or Octologue-based business, there's a good chance you're going to be able eventually to retire from it and still get a very substantial income stream. So the whole thing about, okay, you're going to work 40 hours a week for 40 years, and then get dumped by some company that decides to dump you just a week before you're to get your pension.
That would be the optimum circumstance that most people would find, I mean, in today's world.
Right.
If they could find a job that they could do for 40 years and get paid, not have to worry about getting fired, that would be the greatest job you could get today.
Right. Which would be like nothing compared to what we offer. Because we offer not only a chance to express yourself through your work, but a chance to thrive and flourish economically, financially, to eventually to retire, to be able to stop working at some point and not have to die. You know, just because I'm not working, does that mean I can't eat? No, on the contrary. We have mechanisms for creating a very healthy, invigorating retirement. And we can see how to provide benefits far beyond what any corporation has ever provided their people. You know, it used to be you could work for a corporation for 40 years and retire, and you know, you'd be able to support your family in comfort, just one person working in that environment. No longer true. You know, now it takes two people at 2 or 3 jobs apiece just to get by. Well, we can reverse that. We can go back to a culture where the culture supports you being independent. It's as if the whole society is set up for you to become independently wealthy. And whether you're wealthy or not, you're going to have that kind of security. Wow, that's a wonderful, wonderful side effect of the holomat. And I'm really looking forward to people recognizing it. Oh, wow, look at that.
Well, and also just imagine the value that people will put on each other over all the other things that most people value today. Most people would probably shoot somebody else if they could get a brand new car. You know, maybe even a smartphone. You know, if they could get a new iPhone, they might think about, you know, at least stealing it from somebody else.
Certainly
if they could get away with it.
Doing something unethical for it.
But here is a circumstance where you actually get to the point that people start to see how valuable each member is and feel how valuable they are to everyone else. That in itself is another revelation of the Octologue that, you know, I wonder how long it will take people to grasp, but when they do, you know, the sky is the limit.
I agree, and I'm very, very, very excited about what we're doing. My life has taken a wonderful turn for the better. In the last few years, I've just seen that it has become feasible for me to live the life I've always wanted. And you can too. You listeners, you can live the life you always wanted, and that's not to say it's going to be easy. It is simple, but not easy. And that's okay. A lot of life is like that when you think about it. Think about the Japanese game called Go. In that game, you can learn the rules of the game in about 10 minutes. But people who master that game spend a lifetime learning how to do it well. And the Octologue is like that, okay? You can learn the basics in an hour. All the basics in an hour. But it's going to take a couple of days of study in order to get to where you know how to apply those basics under all the different circumstances you might run into. And you might spend another day still further increasing your grasp of the subject by learning to teach it. We can do this. We can provide all of this. And that's what we're doing. We're making the information available, and you can come find a lot of this information on titanians.org, Titanians. Titanians.org has a lot of this information. We're going to be putting some up on creativeconsultingservices.com, and we're going to be having another website that we have the URL for. We haven't set it up yet, called holomat.com. And so there's a lot of sources of information. And we can be contacted. You can reach me by phone. I know a lot of people don't like to put their phone number out where anyone can call them. I do. My phone number is 561-542-5800. And if you're in the States and you call that number, it'll put you right through to my phone right here in Acapulco. And I will answer your questions as best I can. And I suggest that you formulate your questions with some care, because the quality of what you learn is going to depend somewhat on how you ask, which is normal. So I recommend that people go to these websites, especially right now. Titanians.org is the premier website. Also, there's one called Flourish Fairfield, written as one word, Flourish Fairfield. This was set up prior to my giving some workshops in Fairfield, Iowa, and there's a lot of information on that website. If you contact me directly, I will send you a PDF of your of Flourish, my most recent book, that gives a pretty good overall rundown of what this technology is about. I'll be glad to send it to you as a PDF for free. Or you can go on the website, titanians.org. There's a page there where you can order a paperback version of the book and get yourself educated about the basics. Come to an Acapulco in February. We're going to be giving 3 workshops and a number of presentations to explain what we're doing. And I think you'll find this is a very worthwhile experience. You could be down here in less than a day. You could be down here by plane, and plan on spending. An Acapulco is just 4 days, but there are going to be several events after that, and a couple before that. So give yourself a couple weeks. Come down for a couple weeks, check us out, see what we're doing. And who knows, maybe you're going to go home with a whole agenda of new things you're going to do at home that you didn't even think to do until you came down and saw what's happening here.
Yep, that's all it takes is one person. Mm-hmm. One person with the willpower to get it done.
You are a great example of that, Michael. I'm in awe of what you've done here, and I think
we're just beginning.
We're just beginning, and I think that you've made a historical start here. I think that 100 years from now, and you and I are probably both going to be gone, there's a very good chance that what we're doing here in these days will be remembered as a historical turning point in the evolution of humanity. I think it could be that. And if nobody fucks it up, that's what it'll be.
I want it to be that.
Yes.
And I'm not stopping until it's there, or they kill me.
Exactly. Exactly. I feel just the same way. So, folks, this is the wrap up of this podcast. Send your questions to us. I can be reached at my email. One of my emails that you can send to is Cronus. That's Cronus. Cronus@titanians.org. You're welcome to email me. I cannot tell you how quickly I'll get back to you, but I will definitely get back to you. I do attempt to answer all of my email correspondence pretty quickly. And I've been actually known to give someone an answer to a question and then take that answer and post it as an article, because I sometimes give lengthy responses to people's questions. So bring us your questions, bring us your doubts, bring us your skepticism, bring us your anxieties about this whole thing, because you'd be something wrong with it if you didn't have some of those going on. And we have answers. If you're a seeker for truth and a seeker for a new way and a seeker for a new world order that isn't anything to do with government, then it's time to stop seeking. Become a finder. If you've been a seeker, this is the time in your history when you can become a finder. And it's much more gratifying to be a finder than a seeker. You know, yeah, it's kind of sexy to say, oh yes, I've been a seeker for 20 years, or I've been a seeker for 10 years, or, you know, I could say I've been a seeker all my life. You know, a couple of years I'll be 80. So I understand what it means to be a seeker, but I heartily recommend becoming a finder. When you find this stuff, when you really wrap your mind around it and realize what it can mean to you and to the world, life is going to be different for you. In so many ways, we really, you know, it's almost impossible to list all of the benefits of the holomath, because we're still discovering them. Every day we're discovering new benefits that we didn't even know we had. And we want to give that to you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And come back again soon to the road to Acapulco, the road to Acapulco, and Acapulco 24/7, 365.
Hoorah.
We are living the life. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Good night.